These three games will decide Syracuse football's season.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in a Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. We're always free and available wherever you get your podcasts, whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening on your favorite audio platform. Locked On Syracuse, always free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, the three biggest games for Syracuse football this upcoming season. We're going to discuss two conference opponents later on in the show. You can see if you're watching on YouTube in the On Today's show on the right side of your screen, Pitt and Duke. We're going to start the podcast talking about week one of the college football season when Syracuse plays Tennessee in Atlanta, Georgia for a neutral site game. All that and more here on today's edition of Locked On Syracuse. Now, before we get to everything, today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. I have a question for you all, Syracuse fans. What is Syracuse football going to be this year, record-wise? Is this a team that you feel could contend for the college football playoff, which would at minimum require 9 wins in the regular season? Are they a high-end bowl team? Maybe they have 7 wins, but it's a really strong 7 wins, or perhaps even 8 wins. Or are they just a low-end bowl team? They win 6 games. They take care of business against the opponents they have to take care of business against, and that's that. Or are they going to miss a bowl entirely? What type of team is Syracuse football this season? I'd love your thoughts in the comments section below here, because these 3 games that we're going to talk about on today's show, I feel will give us how Syracuse will be this upcoming season. These are the games that I think will determine the fate of Syracuse. Now, let's start off the podcast talking about the week 1 game. That's right. This is the first game of the season, August 30th at 12 p.m. Eastern in Atlanta, Georgia. Syracuse plays the Tennessee Volunteers. You can always make the argument that week 1 is an important game because, after all, it's the first game of a new season. You want to see how your team could be for the entirety of the year. It sets the tone. But this one is different than maybe any other year or any other normal year for Syracuse. Not that they always go up against cupcakes in week 1 or middling opponents in week 1. But this is Tennessee. Last year, for what it's worth, they began their season against Ohio. Of course, I'm talking about Syracuse. And I did not think that was one of the 3 biggest games on the schedule as far as determining the fate for the upcoming season. I think a lot of it really depends on the opponent. And Tennessee, to me, is the perfect challenge for Syracuse in week 1. This is a type of game where we could learn what Syracuse's upside truly is. I asked you all in the very beginning of the podcast, what type of team is Syracuse for 2025? Well, if they go out and they beat Tennessee in week 1, perhaps the answer is right there. That this is a team that could contend for the college football playoff and at minimum will be a high-end bowl team that probably wins at least 8 games in the regular season. That's what happens if they go out and they beat Tennessee in week 1. And for what it's worth, FanDuel is giving Syracuse a puncher's chance to win this game. If you check FanDuel, the odds right now, Tennessee is a 12.5-point favorite. That's giving Syracuse a shot to win this game. So why Tennessee? Why are they a challenge for Syracuse? Or what I would say, the perfect challenge for Syracuse? Number one, they're an SEC team. The SEC is widely regarded, and I agree, it's the best conference in college football. Now, at times, I think it could be exaggerated a little bit. I think there is definitely some bias with SEC teams, but on average, the SEC is better than any other conference in college football. We know that Syracuse, being in the ACC and also, well, not being very good over the past 20 to 25 years up until, a few spike years here and there, right? 2018, last year, obviously, they have not been very good, and they're in the ACC. So we know that Syracuse is not going to get a lot of respect off the rip. Well, one way to earn respect nationally, beat an SEC team, beat a team like Tennessee. The last time Syracuse played an SEC program, you got to go back to September 13th of 2017. Syracuse lost at LSU 35-26. It was a close game. Syracuse fell behind. They rallied, but just could not win the game in the end. Now, Syracuse most likely entering this season will not be in the AP top 25. And that's okay. They weren't in the AP top 25 last year. They ended up being in the AP top 25. But they will not be in the preseason top 25. Book it. You know who might, though? In fact, they probably will. The Tennessee Volunteers. And if you beat Tennessee in Atlanta, Georgia, in a week 1 neutral site game, you're going to get respect from around the nation if you're Syracuse, and you're also probably going to be a top 25 team entering week 2. And you could start to see the path to Syracuse maybe contending for a college football playoff, or at minimum, just being a really strong team once again, where they win 8, 9, maybe even 10 regular season games if they go out and they beat Tennessee. Number 2, why Tennessee, I think, is the perfect challenge. Not just that they're an SEC team, but I don't think they're the most overwhelming SEC team that they could have possibly faced. Now, if you're a Tennessee fan that has stumbled upon this podcast, this is not meant to be disrespectful. Again, Tennessee is close to a 2-touchdown favorite. And quite frankly, as of right now, I'm probably going to pick Tennessee to win that game. But this is a different team than they were a year ago. Last year, Tennessee was one of the best teams in the country. They were in the college football playoff, but there's been a lot of roster turnover. They have a new quarterback. They have a new running back this year. We'll see how they do. Spencer McLaughlin, for what it's worth, at Locked On College Football, has Tennessee as the 10th best team in the conference this upcoming season, which is not very good. But if you go check FanDuel, it's a little different. FanDuel says that they have an over-under of 8.5 regular season wins. So they should be pretty good, at least according to FanDuel. But in general, I see Tennessee as, okay, they're a good team, clearly. They are definitely a good team. But you know what? Syracuse has a puncher's chance to actually win that game. Whereas if Syracuse was playing a team like, Georgia week 1 or Alabama week 1 or Texas week 1, I would not have much faith at all in Syracuse winning that game. They would at minimum against those opponents be a 3-touchdown underdog. In fact, I think it would be more. I think the line for Syracuse and Georgia would probably be about 25 points minimum in week 1. But Tennessee's also not one of the worst teams in the ACC. They're somewhere in the middle of the conference. They have upside and they have downside to go either way. And so I think that they are a good challenge for Syracuse. So overall, this is an average to an above average SEC team that Syracuse does have a puncher's chance of winning. And I think it's a game that we will find out very early whether or not Syracuse has the upside to be a team that can contend for the college football playoff, or at minimum, again, just be a really, really strong team. 8, 9 wins, get a good bowl, and that's your season in 2025. What are your thoughts? Do you believe that Tennessee is the biggest game on Syracuse's schedule? Comment in the comment section below. Now, coming up, We'll talk about two teams that are within the ACC, and these teams could decide whether or not Syracuse actually makes a bowl in 2025. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. We've all been there, longing on early and waiting forever for concert tickets, sports tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show or a game that you've been dying to see. And live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping, and that's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you could save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. Tired of endless scrolling, trying to find the best deal? Game Time's zone deals pick the best seats in your section for you. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time, also sports tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. This is Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and we still got plenty more to talk about here on today's show. The three biggest games for Syracuse football this upcoming season. Number one is Week 1 against the Tennessee Volunteers from the SEC. And coming up, we're going to talk about two opponents in the ACC that might decide whether or not Syracuse makes a bowl in 2025. Of course, I'm talking about Duke and Pittsburgh, so stick around, obviously, for later on in the show. But first, thank you all so much for the continued support here on Locked On Syracuse. Of course, thank you to all those who continue to like and subscribe to Locked On Syracuse each and every day. And hey, since you've already made it this far in the podcast and you haven't done so already, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It helps Locked On Syracuse grow to reach all Syracuse Orange fans. Again, your support means a ton. Truly, truly the best fans in college sports. All right. Let's get back to the show here. Another important game for Syracuse football is the Duke Blue Devils. That's right. Duke football. It's funny because Syracuse and Duke are historically more basketball programs. At least around the country, if you talk about Syracuse and Duke, the first thing that pops up is not usually the football programs. It's usually the basketball programs. These two teams, for what it's worth, by the way, in the schedule, Syracuse is playing at home against Duke on Saturday, September 27th, and it'll be the 5th game of the season for Syracuse football. Again, normally this is a game that, or it's a basketball game that we're circling, but for football, it's kind of important because I think very quietly, Duke has been on the rise. Again, very quiet, very subtle. Over the past 3 years, here's Duke's regular season records. Let's go back to 2022. 8-4. It's pretty good. 2023, they go 7-5. Okay, so you're a bowl team. And last season, 2024, Duke football went 9-3 in the regular season. That's right. Duke also had a first-year head coach last year, and they also went 9-3. Just like Syracuse football. And in this offseason, Duke went all in. Remember? If you're a Syracuse fan, do you know what Duke did this offseason? If you don't, that's okay. I'll tell you about it right now. But they spent a lot of the money. In fact, all of the money to go out and get a quarterback from Tulane, Darian Mensah, to be their signal caller for 2025. And for what it's worth, Spencer McLaughlin over at Locked On College Football gave his rankings for the ACC, not in terms of, I think, where they were going to finish, but in terms of talent level. He had Syracuse football at 7th in the conference. That's pretty good. As a Syracuse fan and Syracuse alum, I'm not going to complain with someone saying that Syracuse is the 7th best talent-wise team in the ACC. Got no problem with that whatsoever. In fact, he brought it up on the show. What do you think? And I said, I really don't have much thoughts on it. I think it's pretty good. I'll take 7th. Guess who we had one spot ahead of Syracuse? There's a reason why we're talking about this team. The Duke Blue Devils. So this could be a swing game for Syracuse. So why Duke? This could be a game where we find out whether or not Syracuse is a bowl team in 2025. We can go down the schedule right now because after Tennessee, the schedule is as follows. You got UConn at home. If you're Syracuse, that's a game where you simply have to take care of business. Can Syracuse lose to UConn? They technically could. They're an FBS program, but they should beat UConn. We have bigger issues if Syracuse does not beat UConn this season. I don't want to take them lightly, but if you're Syracuse, we cannot have a bowl conversation if you're not beating UConn in week 2. Okay, that's why we're not really talking about them on today's show, because they simply just have to win that game. I don't know what else to tell you. But after UConn, you got your only FCS opponent of the season, I should say. You got Colgate. That's basically Syracuse's only free win on the schedule. And you still got to actually, play the game, but you're playing an FCS opponent. That should be an easy win for Syracuse football. Then you got at Clemson. At Clemson, if you're Syracuse, historically, they've actually, or over recent years, even though Syracuse many times has not been very good, they've actually played Clemson pretty tough over the past several years. But overall, if you're Syracuse, you're going to Clemson. I guess it depends on what happens against Tennessee. But at minimum, you're just hoping to be competitive. But I highly doubt that Syracuse goes into Death Valley and beats the Clemson Tigers. So with all that being taken into account, if everything goes how it's, projected to go, Syracuse is likely going to be 2-2 heading into the Duke game at home. They're going to have wins over UConn and Colgate, and their losses would probably be Tennessee and at Clemson. So that puts them at 2-2. They're in a decent position there. Then you got Duke. But what about after Duke? Well, after Duke, that game is not going to be easy. They're going to SMU, another team that was in the college football playoff a year ago. And the way I look at this game is that Syracuse, if they beat Duke, this is why it's such a big game. If they beat Duke, I think it all but ensures that they will at least be a 500 team at the midway point. Because you have to figure that they're going to beat UConn and they're going to beat Colgate in the first half of the season. So that gives you 2 wins right there. You need 6 to make a bowl. And preferably, you want to at least get 3 wins in the first half so that your job in the second half is a little bit easier. You only got to win 3 games in the second half to make a bowl, right? It's basic math. So you got 2 wins right there, UConn and Colgate. You get your 3rd win against Duke. Okay, you're playing with house money when it comes to SMU, Tennessee, and Clemson. If you win one of those games, terrific. If you lose all 3, that's okay, because to that point in the midseason, Syracuse would have handled its business against teams it's either on par talent-wise or, quite frankly, better than talent-wise, and lost to teams that either are on the road and or simply just better than them. So worst case, you beat Duke, you're in a decent position to make a bowl because you're 3-3 at the midway point. This is a home game. Duke is projected to be a pretty decent team in the ACC this upcoming season. And honestly, it kind of reminds me of when Georgia Tech was coming to town a year ago. I felt that last year, Georgia Tech was the first true test for Syracuse football, and they passed it. They did quite well in that game. They were up 31-14 in the 4th quarter. They almost blew it, but you know what? Who cares if they almost blew it? They won the game. So, what do you all think? Do you think that Duke is one of the 3 most important games for Syracuse football this upcoming season? I'd love your thoughts in the comments section below. I certainly do. I think that this is a game where we could find out very quickly, or at least at the midway point, if Syracuse is going to make a bowl in 2025 or that they're going to disappoint and not make a bowl in 2025. But comment in the comments section below. Maybe you feel differently than I do. Now, coming up, we'll talk about another ACC team, a team that I think Syracuse is going to want revenge against. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. third most important game for Syracuse football in 2025, the Pittsburgh Panthers. And I'm going to tell you all a little story about Syracuse football, and it relates to the Pitt Panthers. Last season, actually, it's a pretty recent story. We're going back to 2024. We know that Syracuse football had a good year. 9-3 in the regular season. They won the Holiday Bowl against Washington State, so they capped off the entire year 10-3. They finished the season in the AP top 25 and in the college football playoff top 25. So they at least received some sort of consideration to make it, even though they weren't particularly close because they were in the low 20s when all was said and done. But what have I told you? And if you're a Syracuse fan that was following along last year, you're probably aware of this, but what if I told you that Syracuse football had a legitimate chance to make the college football playoff a year ago? Because they did. They could have been Indiana from a year ago. Indiana kind of had a soft schedule, but they're in the Big Ten. They end up going 11-1, and they got in the playoff. They deserved it because even though they had this quote-unquote easy schedule, they took care of business, and they went 11-1, and yeah, they got smacked in the playoff, but you know what? I'm sure before the season, if you had told Indiana fans that they were going to be in the college football playoff and they were going to get bounced early and it was not going to be a close game, they would have taken it, just like us Syracuse fans. If they had made the college football playoff last year at 11-1 and they lost in the first round and they lost 45-3, I think we would just be happy that they were in the college football playoff to begin with, even if it ended on a very sour note. But Syracuse had that chance until the door was slammed shut on a Thursday night in late October, where Syracuse football picked up its second loss of the season against the Pitt Panthers. It was on the road, and it was a disaster. It was Kyle McCord's worst game in a Syracuse uniform. It was Kyle McCord's worst game in college football, and maybe his entire life. He threw 5 interceptions, I think, in the first half. If I remember correctly, multiple pick sixes. It was a disaster. Syracuse lost that game to Pitt 41-13, and it effectively ended Syracuse's chances of being one of those Cinderella teams into the college football playoff. They had no chance after that because they already had a loss to Stanford. That was their second loss. You knew even at 10-2, Syracuse was not going to be in the college football playoff, especially because they wouldn't have even been in the ACC title game if all else held true. But let's say Syracuse had beaten Pitt and everything else was the same. Well, they still would be 10-2 and they would still not be in the ACC title game. But at least up until the conference championship game before Clemson ended up beating SMU and stealing a bid, well, we would have been having conversations on this podcast about how should 10-win Syracuse be the last team in, or should it be 9-win Alabama? That's how close it was. For Syracuse potentially being a team in the college football playoff, or at least being in the college football playing conversation, to not. And it was all a blowout loss to the Pitt Panthers. So that's the story for you all. The funny thing about that game is that it was coming off a bye. And Syracuse, once again, will play Pitt at home coming off a bye on Saturday, October 18th. That's the game right there. Syracuse last year was 0-2 coming off a bye, and I could not find the exact record, but prior to Fran Brown, so when Dino Babers was the head coach of Syracuse football, they were also brutal in games after a bye, and it's hopefully that can be corrected in 2025. The other game, for what it's worth, that Syracuse has after a bye is at Notre Dame. So that's not very good for Syracuse as far as record after a bye. But why is Pitt such an important game for Syracuse? Number one, they're always there. The Pitt Panthers are almost always good. They are a consistently solid team under Pat Narduzzi. Pat Narduzzi has been the head coach of Pitt, according to College Reference, since 2015, and Pitt has made a bowl in 7 of his 10 seasons there. In fact, they've also shown that they occasionally could have some upside beyond just making a bowl. In fact, in 2021, I guess technically then they would have made the college football playoff because they won the ACC. Just back then, there wasn't 12 teams and automatic qualifiers. But under today's rules, Pitt is a playoff team in 2021. Of course, they were led by Kenny Pickett, who'd be a first-round pick in the NFL draft. Spencer McLaughlin, for what it's worth, at Locked On College Football, has Pitt as the 8th best team in the ACC. So right behind Syracuse. So if you notice, on today's show, you see that the three most important games, two of them being in the ACC for Syracuse. Spencer has Duke as the 6th best team in the ACC. Then he has Syracuse at 7th best in the conference. And then he has Pitt as 8th best in the conference. So Syracuse is just sandwiched in the middle, basically telling you that these are going to be swing games for the Orange in 2025. And number 2, again, it's the same thing what we said last segment about Duke. This is another game where we could find out whether or not Syracuse is a bowl team. And when you look at their schedule in the second half, they're the easiest game to project as a swing. I'm not saying it's the easiest game. I'm saying it's the easiest game to say that's probably going to be a 50-50 game on game day. Because the final 6 games in order for Syracuse, you got Pitt at home, at Georgia Tech, North Carolina on Halloween, at Miami, at Notre Dame, Boston College at home to end the regular season. All the road games for Syracuse at the end are going to be very challenging. At Georgia Tech is not an easy place to play. At Miami, well, it really depends on the health at that point of Carson Beck, and we'll know at the end of the season whether or not Beck is healthy and playing well. But assuming that he's healthy and playing well, that's going to be a tough game for Syracuse to win at Miami. And then at Notre Dame, it's kind of similar to Clemson, where you're hoping that Syracuse could at least be competitive in that one, but I highly doubt Syracuse is able to pull that one off. And then, as far as the other home games are concerned, North Carolina, I have no idea how North Carolina is going to be this upcoming season. They have a new head coach. You might have heard of him, and Bill Belichick. Are they going to be really good? Are they going to be really bad? I have no idea. And when it comes to Boston College, hey, Syracuse, you want to make a bowl? It's kind of similar to what I said about UConn, even though I think Boston College is better than UConn. But you want to make a bowl, you got to beat Boston College at home. Simple as that. Figure out a way to beat Boston College last year for what it's worth. That was another one of the losses for Syracuse at Boston College. Not a good loss for Syracuse last season. But with all that being said, that leaves Pitt in the second half. And I feel like they're going to be good. Once again, they're going to be probably a bowl team this upcoming season. They have their quarterback coming back from a year ago in Eli Holstein. He definitely flashed last season. It's the easiest game to project as a potential swing game for Syracuse this upcoming year. So it's an opportunity for the Orange to get revenge on Pitt from a year ago. It's an opportunity for Syracuse to prove that they can beat one of the better ACC teams in recent times in a year in and year out basis, right? And it's a swing game potentially if Syracuse is going to make a bowl in 2025. And I guess that leaves us to the overall bowl outlook for this upcoming season. And we're going to touch on it more tomorrow, okay? So you're going to want to tune in tomorrow when we talk about maybe the goals for Syracuse football in 2025. But here's how I view the schedule. All right? The quote-unquote toughest opponents for the Orange are on the road, which makes the road games more challenging than they already would be. It's already tough to go on the road, but you're playing better teams now on the road. But the quote-unquote easier opponents are at home, making the home field advantage even better because you're playing against quote-unquote easier competition. That's the way I see it. So all Syracuse has to do to make a bowl, and this is why I do think they're going to end up making one at minimum, you just got to take care of business at home against teams that you're either pound for pound close to in talent. You can argue that Pitt and Duke have more talent or a little bit less talent, or against teams that you definitely have more talent than. That's all you got to do. It's not like they're playing Clemson at home or Notre Dame at home, teams that are going to have more talent than you. And now you got to hope that home field advantage should do enough. So the schedule was hard, but it breaks in a way where they could still make a bowl game if they just handle their business at home against teams that they can definitely beat. So overall, the three most important games for Syracuse football on the schedule, in my opinion, Tennessee in week 1. Then you got Duke to nearly close out the first half. That's the 5th game of the season. And then you got Pitt, the first game of the second half of the season. I would love your thoughts in the comments section below. Your 3 most important games for Syracuse in 2025. Comment in the comments section below. As far as what is coming up on Locked On Syracuse in the future, it's a 2-parter podcast, Tuesday and Wednesday. We're going to do some goals for 2025 for Syracuse. Mix of team goals, individual goals, some milestones. I'm also going to try to keep it as realistic as possible. I don't want to start the podcast by saying, hey, goal number 1, win the national championship and don't lose a single game. We know that's the ultimate goal, but actual goals throughout the season. That's what we're going to talk about on the next 2 podcasts on Locked On Syracuse. So that's what's coming up on the channel in the near future. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. And for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On Portal Show with football recruiting expert Brian Smith. He's got the latest rumors and signings each and every day. And you can be the most informed fan on the rapid changes to the college football landscape. Find the Portal Podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe. And if you can just do me a favor, tell 1 or 2 of your friends about the Locked On Syracuse podcast so this channel can grow and reach all Syracuse Orange fans. And I will see you all soon. Oh, by the way, we are 47 days away from football season. It's almost there. It's almost there. And you're going to want to tune in to Locked On Syracuse for more football coverage. Take care, everyone.